Awesome. All right. Well, more people may be joining, but I'll get started for everyone who's here since we have a lot of content to get through. And I know uh, hopefully the AMA at the end is interesting to people. So I want to make sure that we have time to spend there. So I'll quickly introduce myself and then give you a run of show, kind of what we're going to go through, what you're going to learn about MBA consulting recruiting. And then we'll go through some content, kind of take you through the whole process at a bird's eye view. And then we'll save any open questions till the end. So I will be monitoring the chat, but if you put a question in the chat as we go through and I don't answer it live, that's because I'm just saving it till the end. So no, I promise I'll answer all of them at some point. So quickly introducing myself, my name's Cate. I am a consultant with BCG's Tech and Digital Advantage practice. I graduated from the Kellogg School of Management with my MBA and MS in Design Innovation. And before getting my dual degree, I worked in corporate strategy and new product development for a large education technology firm in DC. I got into coaching because I came from, a more non-traditional background before I went into the consulting world, and it was very complicated to navigate. And I really, really appreciated the guidance of other people who helped me navigate the process. So that was kind of what brought me to the world of Leland. So I'm going to outline a little bit of what we're going to be covering, and then we'll dive right in. So just as kind of an overview, this is going to be pretty bird's eye. I want to give you all as comprehensive a view of the process as possible, just to make sure that you kind of understand from all the way from application to interview to beyond what that process looks like. I'll do deeper dives on certain sections based on what y'all are interested in, but if there's anything that I don't get to in more detail, please let me know after, and we can figure something out so that we can make sure to answer any other questions that y'all have. So we're going to start with talking about the timeline for MBA recruiting, an overview of applications, what you're going to have to submit, and kind of what you should be expecting going into the application process. Then we're going to talk a little bit about networking and why that's a super important part of the MBA recruiting process. Then the kind of meat of where we're going to spend most of our time is in talking about interviews. So both the case and the behavioral interview. And then some of you may have heard about screeners. We'll cover those briefly as well. And then we'll just kind of touch on once you've gotten the interview, once you've gotten your offer, what's next? What should you be thinking about as you go into your internship? And then we'll save the rest of the time for questions. All right. So first, kind of understanding the recruiting timeline. Let me take a step back first and say, I sent out a survey at kind of the beginning of about 24 hours before this, and I got a lot of really interesting responses. So thank you all for filling that out. But one thing that I just wanted to kind of let everyone in the room know is that almost all of you said that you are feeling terrible or nervous or anxious about recruiting. So that is kind of a commonality. You're not the only one feeling that. Recruiting can really seem like a black box. So don't worry, it's a very formulaic process. It's the same at pretty much every MBA program you're going to go to. The only difference may be a slight difference in dates in terms of when you interview or when your application's due. And then there might be some differences in terms of how your school supports your kind of recruiting journey. But generally, the recruiting timeline looks the same for everyone. So when you get to school in August, your first year student, this is really the time, August and September, to be exploring consulting as a potential recruiting path. So talk to your career advisor, your partner, your families, your second year students that you're going to be starting to meet, and really start to understand whether or not consulting is going to be the path for you. Most schools have blocked out the first, 4 to 6 weeks of your year, so recruiters can't talk to you, and that's a really good and intentional time for you to both bond with your new MBA classmates, but you also want to be kind of thinking ahead in terms of when consulting recruiting is going to kick off in October. And so towards the end of September into October, again, it will differ depending on your school, that's when you're going to start to see information sessions, conversations with recruiters, all of those things are going to pop up. And so this is really when you want to start thinking, okay, I've decided on consulting. I want to pursue this recruiting path. How can I be preparing for that? You want to be updating your resume, making sure that you're highlighting kind of those key consulting skill sets, and we'll talk about what those are in a bit. and making sure that you're also, figuring out what firms you're really interested in interviewing with. Then towards October and November, you're going to start prepping for interviews. So typically, your MBA program will have a consulting club or a similar kind of internal in-house resource to help you prepare, give you materials. It really differs based on the program and how much of a feeder they are to big consulting firms, but there should be some kind of formalized process for you. But either way, you really want to start interview prep in the middle to end of October at the very latest. You'll also be finalizing your applications. So your deadlines will vary, but typically applications will be due before Thanksgiving break. And then you'll start to see what's called invite-only events come out. And those are basically smaller events that the firms do to indicate interest in you as a candidate. They're often office-specific as well. Across November and December, you will start to see first-round interview invites go out. So this will mean that you're asked to complete typically screener interviews. So you submit your application, you're asked to complete something like Pymetrics, which is basically just a test to see kind of, do you have some of the inherent personality traits that firms associate with success there? Or you'll be asked to complete an online case, or kind of a chatbot case is what other people call it. Same preparation as you would for a normal case, but you'll just be asked multiple choice questions online. Interview decisions will be released in early December, and that's really when your casing prep will kind of intensify. So across December and then the very beginning of January, you'll typically case with firm reps. People from the firms will reach out to you to case you if you've gotten interviews, and then you'll be refining your behavioral stories as well. And typically your final rounds will be on a single day in early January. It, again, will differ by the school, but typically you'll have your interviews for each firm back to back on that day. So, Bain, for example, may have a Friday, and then you may interview with McKinsey on a Monday, but all of your Bain interviews or all of your McKinsey interviews will be on the same day. All right, does that make sense? I'll take a pause. Any questions quickly in the chat, and then we'll move along. Okay, great. Okay. So I also mentioned I'll send these slides out at the end. So I know it's a ton of information. I just wanted you to have it. So don't worry if, sorry, my dog's barking. Sorry if you don't worry about getting all the content down. I'll send these to you after so you have it. But okay, so next thing I'm going to talk about quickly is how you differentiate between firms. So I think one thing that obviously people can get a little anxious about is you hear about MBB, McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, the big three firms. And some people approach kind of recruiting as they only want to recruit for MBB. I would highly encourage you not to do that. There are dozens of really amazing consulting firms to work for, and really how to choose which you're going to recruit for depends on your own kind of personal interest and preference. So some things that you should think about on the right hand here: do you want to travel? Where do you want to live after you graduate from business school? Do you want to work for a generalist firm, or are you interested in working with a much more specialized firm that does nonprofit consulting or healthcare consulting, something like that? Are you interested in doing private equity or due diligence or any kind of finance? And then also, of course, most importantly, do you like the people at the firm? Are they interesting? Are you enjoying talking to them? That's really going to be the best indicator for you of whether or not you're going to enjoy the work, is who you're working with. Okay, so 3 application components that you're going to have to submit before Thanksgiving break. So you're going to need to submit a resume, a cover letter, and office location preferences. So first, talking a little bit about the resume here. Important things with a consulting resume versus other things you may be recruiting for. You want to really contextualize your work experience, especially for companies if you're an international student, or if you worked at non-traditional, like not very big brand name companies before you were in business school, like me. So you just want to give one line to kind of show the scale or what the impact is of the company, so that they can put your work experience in the context of the firm that you worked for, and then kind of how they're positioned within the industry that you worked in. And you also want to kind of highlight your big key consulting skills. We'll talk a little bit more about more of those in a second. So reworking your work experience to kind of demonstrate that you have experience with a lot of those core skills. You also want to make sure that if you come from a technical background like engineering, you're simplifying the technical or industry specific language just to make it more general so that HR and then other folks in the strategy consulting space will be able to accurately kind of understand what you were doing. On the cover letter side, a couple things here that kind of make it different from your resume. The first is you want to really reinforce what your personal brand is. And I'm going to talk about that more in a second, but this really just means like how or why you stand out from your peers. What's the niche that you're going to fill in the consulting class that recruiters are trying to create? The most important piece of the cover letter is the why. Why the firm, why the location, and then why that practice or that type of work. So your cover letter for a firm that specializes in nonprofit consulting is going to be very different, and the way you're going to word it is going to be very different than how you're going to word a cover letter for a firm that is completely generalist. And it's also always good in your cover letter to kind of work in your networking conversations. The last piece here is office location preferences. So one thing in consulting recruiting at the MBA level is you recruit for a specific office, and typically you only recruit for one office. So you really need to make a strong personal and professional case for why that office, why that city, or why that's somewhere you want to live longer term. And some people will argue that, especially for McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, it's better to pick a less competitive office. I disagree with this. I think, don't play the game. People can tell if you're not genuinely excited about the city that office is in. And if you don't have strong rationale for why you want to be there, it comes across as not genuine. And oftentimes it actually hurts you in the recruiting process. So pick the office that you're most excited about based on where you truly want to live. However, what I will say is that if you're ambivalent between a couple different offices, assess where you have the strongest networking connections, and then, or where you sense kind of the best vibe, the best feel for you personally, and I would recruit for there. Okay, so let's talk about networking, and I think really the big thing I want to talk about here is personal branding. It's not something that I think is covered a lot in undergraduate career services. So it's something I had to learn completely when I came to my MBA program. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well. Generally, networking is really important during MBA recruiting for three different reasons. The first, and most of you may have heard of this, but it's the airport test. Consulting requires really long hours and tons of collaborative work. So when you're working that long and that hard, you really want to like the people that you're working with. You don't want them to be robots. So you want them to be able to demonstrate that you're someone that, if you two were stuck in the airport for 8 hours, you would have a good time. You'd be able to get along. So it's really just about showing that you're a real person, beyond the interview, beyond school, that you can kind of interact in a way that is enjoyable for everyone around you. The second piece is it demonstrates job readiness. So when you're at a consulting firm, typically how you network can really impact how you're staffed and then also your client relationships. If you're good at networking now, it means you'll be good at getting yourself staffed on projects. So you'll be really successful once you're in the job, and you'll likely be good with clients as well. And then the final piece here is it really helps get your foot in the door, especially if you come from a background that's not typical for consultants. Networking can really help you stand out, and that's kind of where your personal brand element comes into play. So building your personal brand. I'm not going to belabor this point too much. I have a whole other presentation on this, but essentially with personal branding, it's just a way to really differentiate yourself. When recruiters are building a well-balanced class, at a consulting firm, you have many different industries. And as you go up in the firm, as you kind of build your consulting career, you tend to specialize in either an industry or a type of problem. So you may specialize in sales and marketing problems, or you may work exclusively with media companies, something like that. So when recruiters are building a class, they want to build a class of people that are going to fit in all those different niches, right? Not just kind of the one finance bro. So building this brand, differentiating yourself, it also helps make you a more interesting and memorable candidate. And it also sets you up for success. If you're known as the person who loves media and entertainment, who has a background in that, maybe you had a double major in film and economics, you're going to be set up to be easily staffed on those types of projects, which hopefully you'll find the most interesting, and you'll also be the best at once you're at the firm. So how do you do this? 3 different ways. I would sit and basically think about how your friends, family, and colleagues would describe you. Are you a data nerd? Are you analytical, empathetic, charismatic? What is the thing that kind of stands out about you to your peers? What do you do differently? What do you do better than other people? And then also always work in something that's unique and personal about you. So it's not all about the professional, especially in consulting, when again, you're spending so much time with other people and you really want them to understand, not just who you are as a professional, but as a person. So I highly recommend working in something unique and personal as well. And all of these things, all of that information that you start to collect, your personal brand will start to really shine through. You'll start to understand how others see you, how others perceive you. And then you want to shape that into your elevator pitch. Again, we have a lot to cover, so I don't want to belabor this point. If you have questions about an elevator pitch, kind of how to brand yourself, how to market yourself, just set up a 15-minute intro call with me. It's free, and we can talk about it. Okay, last thing on networking. Who are you going to meet? So networking is a really broad concept, but basically the way it works in MBA consulting recruiting is you're going to interact with 3 different groups. So the first group that you're going to interact with, and I would argue that this is the group that's often most overlooked or taken for granted, is second-year students. So this is going to be your first access point to firms. Every second-year student that is returning to consulting went through the exact same process that you're about to go through. They are very empathetic to the anxiety and nerves around the recruiting process. And so they're going to be really great people to help coach you, advocate for you, prep you, and then also just to give you information about the different types of firms as well, or different office locations. In all likelihood, if you meet someone who's going to BCG San Francisco and you really hit it off with them, it's likely you're going to probably like other people in that office, because that's how that kind of chain works. So the biggest piece with second-year students, and I really want to emphasize this because I think a lot of people get it wrong and they let the anxiety and nerves take over. You really need to be respectful and appreciative of the fact that these are really busy students who are also donating their time. I think a lot of students, first-year students, unintentionally come in and expect that the second years are there to just kind of help them and support them, and they've got nothing else going on. And if you get a bad reputation, or if you kind of aren't appreciative of the work that they're putting in, it does come across, and it can have an impact on your chances at firms, because they do ask us kind of who we think are strong candidates, who we have been prepping with. So I would just really encourage you to be respectful, because you never want kind of an off day or a bad impression to hurt your chances. Second group that you're going to work with more at the beginning of the process is recruiting reps. So these are firm employees that are assigned to manage recruiting at your specific MBA program. So if you're going to Fuqua, they'll be people, who either went to Fuqua or they work in kind of the Raleigh-Durham offices. If you went to Kellogg, they'll likely be people in Chicago. And you'll typically network with them a little bit earlier in the process. As you get deeper into the recruiting process and you start to focus on a specific office, that's when you kind of meet this third group, which is the office firm reps. So these are typically people assigned to manage recruiting across schools for a specific location. So if you're recruiting from, Fuqua, UCLA, Kellogg, whatever the school is, you will be recruiting with the same people at the San Francisco office. People who are recruiting for the New York office will be networking with different people. So these are often working consultants. They're also donating their time. So just be aware, they do have other responsibilities, and same thing, I think, across the board. Just really be respectful and appreciative of the time that these people are taking for you. But all in all, networking shouldn't be scary. It's actually kind of fun once you are in it. It doesn't seem that way at first, but I promise eventually you'll get the hang of it, and it is really important. Okay, talking about case and behavioral interviews. This is where we're going to spend, I would say, the majority of our time. So a couple things to expect from interviews. The most important thing here is, I think people kind of view interviewing as a bit of a black box, but that's actually not the case. Interview processes for MBB, or for all types of firms at the MBA level, are kind of very similar. So before you submit your application, and then before final round interview invites go out, you'll get invited to do something that's called a pre-interview or a first round. These are typically screeners and online cases, and these are things that serve as an early kind of filter before you get final round interview invites. What they're looking for is they're testing for kind of a personality profile, and they're testing for an early business intuition. There's a couple different types of screeners. It can be everything from, a full online case where you're recording a video recommendation, you're answering multiple choice questions, prep the exact same way you would prep for a traditional case. Or it could be something like Pymetrics or another kind of personality test, something that's much harder to prep for. I probably wouldn't recommend you prep for those. Just kind of go in, be honest, do your best. But those are intended to kind of identify inherent traits that firm has decided are markers of success at their firm. When you get to final rounds, you are going to have two types of interviews, and you'll likely have multiple of each. You're going to have case interviews and behavioral interviews. If anyone doesn't know what a case interview is, can you comment in the chat now? I just don't want to assume knowledge. I didn't know what a case interview was until, right before I started school. So if you don't know, just put it in the chat. But if no one says anything, I'm just going to assume you all know. Case interviews are, it seems kind of arbitrary, right? Like, why are these firms torturing me and, having me do this case interview? This is horrible. This is so stressful. But it is a really good way to assess how successful you're actually going to be in a consulting role. Because case interviews at the end of the day are just ways to see how you think systematically and like how you solve business problems with limited information. And case interviews and the frameworks that you build specifically actually map really similarly to what you would be doing and kind of how you would break down a problem when you're in the job. Behavioral interviews are intended to kind of capture everything that the case interview doesn't. So how are those soft skills? How's your teamwork? How's your collaboration? How's your leadership experience? What are those kind of elements that are critical to success for consultants? And how they'll do that is by asking about your prior work experience, and they'll dig deep into your prior work experience. So you need to know your resume inside and out. You need to have really, really strong stories, and you need to know how to communicate very effectively. All right. So breaking down the case components, case interviews can be pretty intimidating, but they basically all follow the exact same format. First, you're going to have what's called a case start. This is basically a prompt that you're going to be given by your interviewer, and you will summarize it back to them after they read it, ask some clarifying questions. And your goal here is really to identify the industry and the problem that you're facing. The next thing that you'll go into is building your framework. And these always come one after another. When you build your framework, you're basically creating a structure for how to solve this problem, right? And you're figuring out your hypothesis. This needs to be what's called mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, or MICE. Basically, that just means you want things to fall into logical buckets. Then things kind of differ depending on the direction that you go. All cases will typically have exhibits, math, and brainstorming, but the order in which they have them and how much they have of one or the other can differ between cases, and it differs between firms as well. Case exhibits are basically just charts or other types of data that you're going to be given, and you're going to be asked to analyze and break down that chart and pull out insights. Case math is when you're going to be asked to do mental math. You're going to be expected to know specific formulas, and you'll be expected to use those and the data that you're given in exhibits to calculate metrics that are going to help you solve your problem. So think things like gross margin, decline in profitability. It can even be things like customer lifetime value. And lastly, brainstorming. So brainstorming is basically just a way for you to demonstrate your business intuition, your creativity, your kind of expansiveness of thinking. This will just be when they ask you to brainstorm, for example, ideas for growth. And you'll give a list, and then they'll ask for more, and then they'll ask for more. And your ideas just can keep coming up with things. They just want to see how far you can go and kind of how creatively you can think. And then finally, and arguably most importantly, is going to be your recommendation. Recommendation always comes right at the end. That's kind of the closer of the case. and it's always around 2 minutes. This is when you're going to present your final answer to your client. And based on what you've done throughout the case, you're going to have supporting evidence, considerations, and risks to present them with that are going to support your recommendation or your final answer. So when thinking about how to prep for case interviews, there are 3 big stages that I suggest that people go through. So the first stage is kind of foundational, that's skill building. The next stage is repetition, and then the final stage is simulation. So in the foundational stage, this is going to be the first thing that you do when you start prepping for case interviews. And basically what this means is you're just going to figure out how to systematically tackle and solve each piece of the case. So every part that we talked about earlier, from case exhibits to case starts to recommendations, there is a formula, or there is a way to answer correctly, right? Your answers may be different, but the way you answer, there's a structure to it. So once you know the structure, it's much easier to kind of move forward and move through a case because you know what's expected of you. So you need to learn kind of what is the formula for each stage of that case, and kind of how do you tackle it. And you can learn this through kind of a bunch of different ways. You can look at things like there's case prep books. You can look at videos online. You can work with coaches, or you can do things like work with your consulting club. Almost all the consulting clubs will do some kind of formal prep in the fall. But again, it just depends kind of on when you're recruiting and how useful those resources are for you on your campus. You also want to be studying kind of key business terms and formulas that you're going to encounter. And then you want to build familiarity with common industries and case types so that you can better kind of customize your solutions and frameworks. Even if you know nothing about industrials, for example, it'll be really helpful for you to have kind of a 3-sentence understanding of the industrials industry, how it differs, and just thinking a little bit about that industry's cost drivers and revenue drivers, because it really helps you personalize the case. And again, going back to the not a robot thing, that's really important. Okay, so practice problems. This is really a choose your own adventure, but there's a couple different ways to do it. So the first way you can do it is you can run drills, and basically how you'll do this is you'll sit with a friend, or you'll sit with a coach, or somebody at your career office, and you work just on case starts, for example. So you'll just prompt each other. You'll ask clarifying questions, give the summary, that person will give you feedback, and then you'll do another and another and another. And that way you are getting the formula ingrained in your head, you're getting sharper, you're getting cleaner. This is really important to do with frameworks. This is my number one thing, is that you should be running drills on your frameworks. It's something people forget. It's really important to do. You can also use a tool like Rocket Blocks to do this for math and market sizing. I think this is something like Rocket Blocks, or I know there are free equivalents, but most MBA programs will pay for you to do Rocket Blocks. So just double check and see if that's the case at your school. That's really the best thing for market sizing and those kinds of math concepts specifically. The last thing here you can do as well is just read through cases. Use old casebooks, so think like 2006, 2007, 2008, or the early teens, because a lot of people use those later casebooks like 2017, 2018 and beyond to do mock cases. You don't want to get exposure to anything that people are going to be giving you. But old casebooks are really good for that kind of practice. So then the last stage is going to be mock interviewing. And this is kind of, I think, what people mostly think of when they think of as casing. So this is going to be full mock case interviews that you're going to do with second-year students, friends, firm reps towards the end of your cycle, and potentially career advisors or coaches as well. So you'll go through a full mock case, you'll get feedback from the person who's casing you, and then you'll need to go back and review that case and review that feedback carefully. You can also pair up with your peers, and you can do case swaps. So each of you kind of gives and receives a case, and you do those back to back. That's a really good thing to do for stamina, because when you're in the interview environment, you're going to be getting multiple cases back to back. You don't get breaks in between. And so it's really good to practice doing cases back to back towards the end of your cycle, just so you're prepared kind of going into the interview environment. I also recommend that when you're doing case swaps, you only give cases that you've gotten. So when a second year student cases you on like dark sky is a very common case, for example. Now kind of you're prepared to give that to other people because you know what to look for because somebody's giving you the feedback of how to do that case well. And then the last thing, and this is really important, you should always be tracking your progress. So track your progress, and this will help you identify kind of the areas in which you need to improve. You can do this by using a case log. If you don't know what a case log is, again, message me. I can send you some examples. But it's basically just a way to track all kind of the pieces of the case that you're doing, how you've performed, and get a better sense for where you're at relative in certain areas versus others. All right. So preparing for case interviews, these are just general like tips that I think are helpful. I think people should start prepping as early as possible. You all are already on it by thinking about this now. I was not thinking about this during my recruiting cycle this early, but both case and behavioral interview preparation is really important. And I think the earlier you start prepping, the more time you buy yourself if there's an area in which you end up like particularly struggling. And just remember that behavioral preparation it can be overlooked in favor of casing, and they're really equally important. So a couple tips. First, again, start as early as possible. Next, set realistic goals and timelines. The first year fall is, to use the most cliche corporate phrase ever, drinking from a fire hose. It is a whirlwind. So just be honest with yourself about how much you're going to be able to take on and how much you're going to accomplish. And make those estimates a bit conservative. You want to hold yourself accountable with a timeline, but at the same time, you also want to give yourself grace and flexibility with also enjoying this new phase of your life and this new experience. You want to be going out and making friends. You don't want to be locked in your room casing constantly. So that adds to the start as early as possible so you buy yourself additional time. Develop a system and stick to it. Casing is very formulaic. There's ways to formulate how you respond to pieces of the case to succeed. Have that foundation before you start casing each other. It's really important to kind of avoid bad habits. So make sure that you've worked with somebody, either a career peer or a coach or a second year student, someone who's gone through the recruiting process, to make sure that you have a really strong foundation before you dive too deep into the process, so that you're not ingraining bad habits. Leverage all your campus resources, sign up for every campus consulting group, talk to your second years. They are going to give eons and eons of time to you. They really, really want to give back, and they're going to want to support you through the whole process. So make sure you're leveraging kind of all those elements on your campus. And then the last piece here is run your own race. I think the recruiting process for consulting can feel really competitive. And while it is competitive in that there's a lot of people who want to do it and not a ton of spots, at the end of the day, you don't want to kind of have this focus on comparison and feel like you need to kind of be cutthroat in the process, because if you support your peers who are also recruiting and you learn from your peers, it makes you a better applicant. And at the end of the day, that's what's most important. So just be kind to each other. I think that's something that is often overlooked. Okay, I'm going to cover behaviorals really quickly because I don't want to spend a ton of time here. Basically, in behavioral interviews, they're just going to ask you questions that are very similar to every behavioral interview you've probably ever done. What's really important is that you need to demonstrate these key consulting skills. These are the same that you need to demonstrate on your resume, but you need to be able to really clearly articulate how you have experience doing this in your prior careers. I would argue that on here, the most important are insight generation, experience working collaboratively, client readiness, and demonstrated success. You really want to be quantifying everything you're doing as much as possible, not in terms of like you have to be doing math all the time, but if you can show the impact in a quantitative way, that's really powerful on the resume. So just be thinking about that. This is the STAR-L format. If you've never heard of it, it's basically a way to structure love formulas. This is just a way to structure behavioral answers, so stories about your previous work experience to answer behavioral questions. So a couple of things here. Just start with contextualizing the situation, short and sweet. talk about the problem at hand, how or why you were the person who was put in charge of solving it or dealing with it. What did you take? What steps did you take to accomplish that task? Really important to show the clear logic for why you took those steps. And then the result. So what's the impact? How did it resolve? Quantify the impact if you can. And then the learning. What would you do differently? Why would you do something differently if you would? And then how would this potentially apply to a career in consulting? All right. Acing internships and securing offers. So very quickly, let's jump forward a year in the future. You've gotten the internship offer. Now what? What am I doing? Everything I've been doing up to this point, I have all this free time. What do I do? A couple things you're going to want to do. The first is you're going to have a month-long decision period. So after you do your final round interviews in January, you'll likely hear back very quickly, either the same day or within a week. So you'll know really quickly whether or not you need to pivot and start recruiting for something else, or you will know really quickly, if you've got an offer or multiple offers. Amazing. If you're evaluating multiple offers, a couple things to think about. When you pick your internship offer, you really need to be evaluating it with kind of the full-time in mind. This is eventually the firm that you're hopefully going to get an offer from for full-time. You're going to go back. So really think through benefits packages, everything, about the firm, staffing model, geographic location, things like that when you're picking between firms. But at the end of the day, you can't really pick wrong as long as you like people. So, don't overly stress. Don't renege on offers. So if you got an offer during early recruiting for another firm, and then you get an offer from, perhaps an MBA firm or something that you perceive as kind of more prestigious later on, you may want to renege. There's a lot of implications to doing this for you from your school. Typically career services imposes penalties on students who renege on offers. It's also just generally hurtful to the reputation of your program. So I would just think really carefully about the types of firms that you're really interested in and that you really want to focus on when you're recruiting, and then just focus on those. And yeah, don't accept an offer and then go back on it 3 weeks later. That's stressful for everybody. And when you do decide where you're going to go, decline the competing offers gracefully. Make sure you reach out to everyone that you recruited with, that you networked with. Let them know about your decision in a respectful and kind of timely manner. Okay, during the internship is wild. It is fun. It's exciting. It's very stressful. It'll be great. You guys are going to have a great time. But you need to be kind of still orienting towards your offer's not secure, right? So you need to keep networking. But it's much easier now that you're at the firm. You're going to be working on a case team. You have a network right there. You're going to be talking to people. Managing partners are going to take you out to lunch. They're going to do stuff for you. Just make sure you're kind of continuing to network within the firm and eventually trying to get closer and closer to the area in which you're most excited about or interested in, because that's going to set you up for success when you come back full time. Make sure you're proactively asking for feedback from your manager, not just from your manager, but also from your peers on the team. As an MBA consultant, you're going to often be working with associates who are right out of undergrad. Ask them for feedback. Often they've been at the firm for 2+ years. Mine knew much more than I did, and she was amazing. And so they can be really helpful. And it's also less scary to get feedback from them than I think from your manager or from a partner. Be leverage for your team. Basically what this means is it's kind of people talk about leverage as you're either leverage for your team or you're not. You're either helpful or you're kind of dragging the boat down. Everyone assumes interns are going to drag the boat down. If you can even get to neutral in terms of your contribution, that's awesome. But if you can be leverage, if you can actually be additive and helpful, that's a huge positive sign for people. And then don't assume that offers are guaranteed. Around 80% of interns has been kind of the benchmark, around 80% of interns getting offers. That's a little lower than it was during COVID. So there's just been some kind of market shifts. It likely will be lower this year as well because of the market. So just do the best you can, work hard, don't take anything for granted, and you'll be totally fine. It really requires, for the most part, you pretty actively blowing stuff off to make a bad enough impression that you wouldn't get an offer. But just be mindful they're not guaranteed. Okay. Awesome. I know that was an unbelievable amount of information, and I'm sure there's other areas in which y'all want to go deeper. So I'm saving the last 15 minutes just for questions. What questions do you have? You can turn on your camera and ask me live and send in the chat if you want. But yeah, just any questions, anything that I can answer for you. Oh, I got a question. Oh, Alex C asked about case prep books. Case in Point is the most common one. That's definitely the one that I would recommend. Case in Point's really helpful, whatever's the most updated version. Ben asked about, or Brian asked about, can a paralegal get into consulting? Definitely. I think if you're coming, it really depends on the background you're coming from in terms of, are you, you were a paralegal and now you're going into your MBA. I think if that's the case, the MBA program is very often used for career changing. And so I've seen people who were in musical theater before their MBA program go on and get offers from all three big firms. So yeah, I do not think that kind of background would hold you back. I actually think it might be an asset, something differentiated, something that stands out. Yes, Nikki.
Hey, thank you so much for doing this, by the way. It's been super helpful and very informative. I have two questions. First, how can we find out which firm specializes in specific industries? For example, if I'm interested in working in entertainment, post consulting, how can I find out which firm has the best reputation or best relationships with other companies? And then my second question is about pre-MBA internships. I'm not sure if you touched on that. I was a few minutes late to the call, but just how can we kind of, I guess, how do we go about finding a pre-MBA internship in general?
Sure. Okay, I'll do the pre-MBA internship piece first, and then I'll talk a little bit about finding firms and industries. So pre-MBA internship, I think typically consulting firms, most of the consulting firms that have a formal recruiting process through the MBA don't offer pre-MBA internships. What they do offer is summer or early recruiting. So if you are depending on your racial identity, depending on your background, there are DE&I programming that they do to basically bring people into the firm earlier, give them more time, give them more support. So a lot of that recruiting takes place over the summer, but that's really the only pre-MBA thing I've seen done for big consulting firms. For general pre-MBA internship recruiting, I've always seen people have the best luck just reaching out to places. So if you're, for example, interested in the startup space, or if you're interested in healthcare, reaching out to a health tech startup, something like that would be, and just offering your help and your support in the time before your MBA program is something I think that they would really appreciate. That's typically how I've seen people kind of do those types of internships. I've not seen a ton of formal programming. On the industry or the niche piece, two different things to think about there. So the first is that most of the really big consulting firms have obviously practice areas kind of across the board. As you start to talk to people who work at the firms, as you start to talk to second year students in particular, you're going to get a really good sense for what firms have really good reputations in one place or the other. So I'll give you an example. When I was recruiting, I worked in the tech and digital advantage practice at BCG. That was really the reason that brought me to BCG over other offers that I had. I literally talked to somebody at Bain who told me that if I wanted to do that work, BCG was going to be a better place for me. Whereas if I wanted to do something like private equity, Bain might be a better choice. So you'll kind of hear about that as you have conversations. But also one thing you can do is you can look at client lists or client stories. So Obviously, client lists like aren't public, but if you go to firm websites and you're reading through their success stories or kind of things that they're advertising on their website, clients they're advertising to have worked with, you can get a really good sense if you're familiar with the media industry, for example, about which firms are pulling in the biggest name clients there. So that's what I'd recommend for broad, like big firms. Smaller firms, there are some firms that are really well known for specific things. So like Huron, for example, is really known for education and healthcare consulting, but like primarily healthcare consulting. Guidehouse, for example, is really known for nonprofit consulting. You'll hear about some of those firms through on-campus recruiting, but I also would always just encourage people like Google and LinkedIn search, try to find people who you think have interesting careers, see if they've worked at any consultancies. A lot of people who jump into industry worked in consulting before, so that might be like an interesting way to try to find firms as well. Is that helpful? Anything else you would say on that? Cool. Awesome. Okay, Ashna asked about networking tips during conferences. So a couple thoughts here. One thing that I think is really important about conferences is if you're coming to a conference for a specific purpose, right? If you're going to a healthcare conference, for example, and you're meeting folks with, a background, or they work at Bain or Accenture or Deloitte or wherever, you don't want to, they are probably not at that conference looking to have a bunch of conversations about recruiting. So the best tip that I can give you for those types of networking conversations is make it about the topic at hand and make it fun. So if you meet someone who works at Deloitte, you really hit it off with, you're both at, UCLA's healthcare conference, and that's kind of how you're meeting. Talk about healthcare, talk about why you're passionate about it or interested in it. Ask her about her work at Deloitte, ask her if she's doing anything in healthcare. You can. Okay, sorry. There is a thunderstorm where I am, and it took out our Wi-Fi. So on the phone hotspot now. So back to answering questions. Okay, Evans. So to answer your question, basically, I don't think there's such a thing as overqualification, especially if you have an advanced degree and now you're in an MBA program, because it's not as if you're recruiting for a different position than anyone else. So all that extra degree is going to do is it's going to give you an advantage over somebody else who maybe doesn't have that degree, right? You can talk about how it's a differentiator during the recruiting process. I don't think there is such a thing as overqualification. Um, I would recommend that if you want to do strategy consulting, you recruit through the MBA side. If you're interested in being an expert, um, expert track at consulting firms is a completely different recruiting process. They typically recruit people like straight out of PhD programs or other master's degree programs for those. So I don't know a ton about that recruiting process, but my guess is that an MBA would not be the best place to recruit for those. Thanks, Amanda, for confirming. Video and phone are good now. Um, all right. Any other questions? Anything else I can answer? If not, I can let you go on to enjoy the rest of your Monday night. Oh, I'll throw one thing up on the screen actually. Just before we go. Person with multiple jobs. Brian, can you explain what you mean, someone with multiple jobs? Gotcha. Oh, gotcha. Okay. So someone who worked a bunch of jobs before the MBA. I think it depends on your number of years of work experience. I really think the nice thing about coming out of an MBA program is it's really a clean slate. So whatever kind of was happening before, if you jumped around a lot because you were interested in trying out different things in your early career, or maybe you suffered from the tech layoffs, things like that. I think the nice thing about the MBA is it really presents a clean slate for firms. So while they do care about your prior work experience, what they're going to care a lot more about is your ability to perform in networking and casing, because that's the best indicator for them that you're going to be successful. So again, like one of my best friends at my program who got offers from all of MBB, she was literally in musical theater before Kellogg. So I I really think you can make the transition from anywhere. It's just easier from maybe certain backgrounds than others, but the MBA kind of levels the playing field, and the casing process, as frustrating and horrible as it is sometimes, also really levels the playing field. Booth sends a lot of people to MBB. Yeah. Another thing that you can do if you're interested, if you're like deciding between MBA programs, if you haven't committed to one yet, or if you are just curious about what firms your program has the best relationships with, you can look at employment reports. So I think employment reports are a really great way to see kind of what firms are recruiting the most people from your school, and so potentially kind of where they're going to be the most spots for you. Evans, great question. I've seen case interviews pretty much across the board for most corporate strategy roles, and I've seen them for corporate strategy roles. I've seen them for some product roles, though it's a little bit different. Sometimes you have to give a presentation and work with data a little more. And then behavioral interviews will be for everything. So, behavioral interviews you'll pretty much have to do for any job. But in leadership development programs, if what you're talking about is when a firm brings MBA students in and then does rotations where they're in operations for 6 months and then they're in finance and then they're in strategy, those I don't know for sure, but I would imagine they would do some kind of case interview as well. Awesome. Oh, rotations, great. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure if leadership development programs do formal casing. It would likely be a little less intense than the type of casing that you would do for MBB, but generally casing I think casing is a great way to prep for pretty much any type of interview. because it's really like a way of thinking and a way of breaking down problems. And kind of regardless of the type of test you're presented with, that's a useful skill. So awesome. Well, if anybody has any more questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Happy to stay a few minutes after and answer anything else people are curious about. If not, I'll send you all the slides from this presentation today. And thank you again for your attention and your questions. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to shut the line.